Moral of the story at the beginning, the establishment of the reality of the spiritual debt or spiritual transaction system legitimizes the use of money. Okay, today is the 10th of January, 2024. This is the first real attempt at recording anything real that I've ever made, and I'm kind of annoyed to be sitting here doing it. Okay. So, establishing the reality of the spiritual debt or the spiritual transaction system. It's not very difficult. I've got two examples, but hopefully anyone who cares or is listening can elaborate and come up with their own examples. So the examples I give thereby are supposed to be taken as representative and not, there's more to it. It keeps going from here. It's not like this is all you get to establish the reality of spiritual debt. Okay. Someone helps you move. So one of your friends helps you move and you feel you owe them. Or in a more social context, somebody pays you a compliment and you feel that you need to say something nice, compliment them back. So if anyone listening has ever experienced anything like that, and I'm sure that most of us have, probably all of us, but probably all of us have experienced that. So those experiences are supposed to be enough to convince the individual that the spiritual debt or transactional system is real. Just like money goes back and forth. It trades hands. It's for trading. You give me money, I give you something else. You give and you get a sort of monetary system, but really it's a system of magnitudes and imbalances in magnitudes or magnitude types. So when you give me money, yes, I get more money, but at the same time, you got something. So whereas I have more money, you now have more something. And looking at it in the negative respect, now you have less money and I have less something, a cow or a chicken or some asset, good service, etc. You all know what I mean. Okay, I have to mention that I don't think that it's possible to prove the reality of the spiritual transactional system. That's why I say draw upon your own experience and please see if you find that convincing. I have my notes right here. I was supposed to give an example of the abuse of the spiritual payment system. Okay, so now here's another type of experience that you're supposed to say, not necessarily have I ever experienced this specific experience before, but have I ever experienced anything similar to this experience? And also, are experiences like this enough to convince me of the reality of a system of spiritual transaction that is similar to and is supposed to legitimize the use of money? So the abuse of the spiritual payment system. Yeah. So someone helped you move 10 years ago, and ever since then, they keep saying, didn't I help you move that one time? You know, whenever they ask you for stuff, and they keep asking you for stuff, and they keep using that as a way to get more stuff out of you. And it's like, when does this end? Like, yeah, you helped me move, but it was like 10 years ago, and I've done a million things for you since then. Like, when is the end of this? All right, so that's an example. I tried to come up with examples that are uh, going to be easily, that are going to be experienced by most people. That's always a better example than something that's not. Okay. Okay, so back to, I have to say, like, I don't think it's possible to prove that this system exists, like, and I'm not going to hold myself up to this standard. If anybody else ever feels like taking that upon themselves. Also, I don't even think that I can prove that I can't prove it. That's another important thing I wanted to mention. Because, you know, just being transparent, and I did think about it for a little while. I put some effort into it, and I thought various things like, um, you know, if reality is the source of concepts, can concepts prove the existence of reality? And that sounds enticing at first, but when you think of concepts that contain errors, then it sort of get like in a rigorous sense, or like maybe in an academic debate sort of sense, there would be material there to say, whoa, this concept here was flawed or erroneous. It contained these particular flaws or errors. Therefore, the same thing could be said about an attempt to use the existence of concepts to prove the existence of reality. So that's the same sort of thing. Um, you know, like I find it perfectly convincing that, you know, if concepts exist, of course reality exists. But that's not the but that's not the order of things, anyways. That's not how things played out in reality. There was reality first, and then there was concepts. So I'm not really too invested in trying to find a proof that says, you know, because concepts exist, reality is as a consequence also in existence. I'm not really too invested in that because of the way things really are. Is reality was first and then concepts were second. In the same way, so in the current context where the attempt is to legitimize money by using this thing that we're calling the spiritual transactional system or the spiritual debt system, um, I'm gonna like metaphorically equate it to what I was just talking about. Like, I'm not saying that I don't have a proof. Like, 1 second. Let's see this. And then if I pick up the recording back from there, it begins again. Okay, I'm back. I just realized that the microphone is going to pick up sounds around me, which I should have anticipated. So I'm going to have a more difficult time doing editing if I ever wish to publish anything like this or in general. Okay, so back to where I was. I'm not going to seek to prove that I can establish the reality of the spiritual payment system, or, you know, hopefully I don't have to do that, you know, in order to, like, hopefully none of you listening out there is like, if you don't convince me, number one, that the spirit exists, you know, that the mind and emotions and, you know, if you don't convince me of the reality of reality and that we exist and all that, then, why should I bother to listen to anything else you say? There's always going to be something you have to take as a given. And hopefully, because I'm trying to make a point about the legitimacy of the monetary system, hopefully I don't have to establish the reality of existence in order to do that. Hopefully we can begin by everybody who's listening just admitting to themselves that, like, I experience emotions and I feel good sometimes and I feel bad sometimes, and when somebody does something nice for me, I feel like also doing something nice back for them so that I don't owe them anything. So that's a sort of spiritual payment system, and it's very similar to money. And we're going to use that system to legitimize money, just like I said in the first 5 seconds of the video, but you have to expand. Anyways, okay. So a good reason to point out how to abuse the spiritual transactional system, using one of those examples that anybody can come up with that are like, I helped you move 10 years ago. Don't you owe me? Or somebody does something nice for you, and you try to, you don't want them to do something nice for you because you don't want to feel like you owe them. Notice the word owe. But you don't want to feel like you owe them, and they say, no, it's you don't owe me anything, it's fine. And then later on, they do bring it up as though you do owe them something. And you're like, hey, I thought you said, but you didn't. Okay, hopefully you know what I'm talking about, because that's one of the things that money kind of, I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's one of the reasons that money exists. You helped me move 10 years ago, and ever since then, you've used that fact to, get so much out of me. There was never, we're going further into the example of how this spiritual system can be abused. So it's very difficult to say how much things are worth in this spiritual world. Like, if you compliment me, obviously that's like a low level, and I feel like if I compliment you back, then I'm pretty much paid up, and it would be very difficult for you to convince me to, say, give you a ride across the country because you gave me a compliment. And I don't think that you would try to use that argument, because you would see that it would fail. Games aside, I don't think games and just the attempt to go to extremes aside, yeah, I think that's true. But like, it still is very difficult to say how much a favor is worth, and if you understand the example that I'm trying to, or the picture I'm trying to draw with the example with the person who asked too much, or maybe you've asked too much. So when I try to make you draw upon an experience like that, that's one of the reasons that money would have been invented in the first place, is what I'm saying, is what I'm putting forth. Because money having some sort of hard numeric value, it makes it a lot easier to say, okay, I'll help you move. Let's say that doing so is worth $50, right? Or, a pizza. If I get something in return, then in there on the spot, then it's easier if later on the person says, you still owe me to say, nope, we agreed at the time that it was worth one pizza or $50 or whatever. And using a pizza would be an example of the barter system. And everybody's familiar with the barter system and how it's used when we talk about the money system as like a precursor to the money system. Everybody's very familiar with that. And like how it's very easy to say that money is supposed to represent chickens and cows, and that's the barter system, and you all know that. But I'm saying that the spiritual transactional system is even a precursor to the barter system, because that would have been the original, or the source of the other systems. The spiritual system would have been like, your parents raise you and you feel like grateful to them. Or do you just feel grateful at any point in general? Like, what is the feeling of gratitude? Like, what is the feeling of being grateful? Well, it probably incorporates a lot, but I think that one of the things it incorporates, and one of the ways I'm using it right now, is you feel like you want to give something back. And so there's that. So that's the spiritual system. That's the abuse of the spiritual system. And using money in that way, and it's a precursor to the barter system. Using money in that way to sort of like establish, like, look at, you did something nice for me, but you can't hold that over my head to an infinite amount. Using money or the barter system to do that is not without its flaws either. I'm not saying, while I'm saying these things, I have to point out that I know that there's exploits to all of this. And I just, in being transparent and saying, I want everybody who hears this to think the same way that I do. I do want, at the end of this, I do want everybody who hears this to think that money is a good thing. And I want people to stop saying, why don't we just do away with money? Or, money is just a concept. It's nothing. A diamond only has value because we agree that it has value, or a dollar only has value because we agree that it has value. That's all true. But it's not meaningless either. And what in the example they say, like, and what's often said is something like, well, if one day we just all agreed that gold doesn't have any value anymore, well then, it doesn't. That's true, and it's true for any particular asset like gold or money or chickens or cows. But when you talk about it generally, like money in general, and then if you're not just talking about one thing like gold, but you're talking about everything like gold, right? So now it's not just, oh, well, gold only has value because we say it does. And it makes it sound sort of arbitrary, and it makes it sound sort of disconnected from any sort of meaning. Well, we're about to find out that it is extremely connected to life, and what must be your opinion of life if you say either these things have no meaning or they do have meaning. If they are good, then you have one opinion of life. You must. And if they are bad, then you must have this other opinion of life. All right, so let's go back to people saying, Money has no meaning. Okay, so gold has no value, quote unquote. Gold has no value. Like if one day we woke up and everybody decided that gold didn't have any value anymore, it wouldn't. And that's true of one particular asset. But if we woke up one day and said, not only does, okay, so if gold wasn't the standard of value, then, you know, what is the standard of value? Is it cows? Is it chickens? Is it money? Is it the barter system? Is it the paper money system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And so now you wake up and you say, not only is gold worth nothing, but so is any standard of value, right? And so since anything can be a standard of value, and when you talk about the barter system, you always say cows and chickens. So now it's gold, cows, chickens, paper, money. It's everything. It's everything. It's actually everything in existence. And that means if nothing in existence has any value, well, then what do you think about life? Okay, so that establishes that. And I find that argument convincing. And I'm not really going to go any farther to try and make it convincing for a wider audience, because I think that it was already. I think. Yeah, I'm not going to cover any potential plot holes in that argument because I find it convincing, and also I think it's time to move on again. Let me see my notes. This is the actual and real motivation for money. This is what it is, and this is what it does. Expand from there. Expansion note. Those who would wish to do away with money can only be saying, let's just use the spiritual system. Oh, okay. So, yeah. When I talk about people who say that money is the root of all evil, or they say things like money has no value, or gold only has value because we all say it does, and by saying it that way, they make it sound like a very arbitrary sort of decision that we've made to have gold be a standard of value. So people like that are, I don't want to be like, prejudicial. But arguments like that are usually being made. Arguments like that are usually being made in order to convince of the legitimacy of sort of altruistic, like basic. Cut to the chase. Communism, socialism. Okay. So, yeah. Arguments like that are usually being made by altruist offshoot social systems, right? So, everybody share everything, everything like that. And so if you are one of those people, and I don't want to say one of those people even, but if you're in favor of the ideas that come from altruism, like a communist social system or a socialist social system, or it doesn't even have to go so far as to even speak of a social system. Like if you believe that money has no value, or if you think that money is a bad thing, maybe you're religious, maybe you think that, maybe you put a lot of stock into the biblical lines about money being the root of all evil, and it's easier for eye of a needle, camel, rich man into heaven. Hopefully you know what I'm talking about. because that was a big thing for me when I was young. Okay. So if you're thinking anything along these lines, like, what do we need money for? Let's just do away with money. Why don't people just do things for free? Okay. If you're thinking anything along those lines, so if you're saying let's do away with money, my aim in writing this down was to say, like, if you say that, then you are by default saying let's go back to the spiritual transactional system, and because what I had in my head was, since that's the original, that's the OG transactional system, and without the barter system, or without the gold standard, or without the credit standard, without any of those, there's nothing left. There's nothing left but the spiritual system. So the people who want to do away with money, it's not usually their intent to say, let's go back to the barter system, because the barter system had so many advantages that the gold standard or credit system, don't have, because I don't think that anybody agrees that the barter system was superior to the gold standard or the cash system. Right. So basically, I think that somebody just kind of, haphazardly blurts out, let's get rid of money because it does seem arbitrary. No. Let's get rid of money. And so they just kind of, like, without putting a lot of thought into it, like a lot of integrative thought, like I've already delved deep once into, like, if you get rid of all these standards of value, then you're just getting rid of value, generally speaking, and your opinion of life must be that it is not worth living if you're doing that. I've already gone that deep in integrative effort. But yeah, like, usually I think these arguments are usually pretty toothless, except that, they're not. They do grow up and become real social systems that are detrimental to, the individuals living in them. But anyways, they start out on the street in a sort of haphazard, arbitrary sort of, not really much thought put into them, like, let's get rid of money. And I don't think that when you're saying let's get rid of money, I don't think that you realize that you are probably saying, there's still the spiritual transactional. If my arguments have been convincing, and or if you can hypothetically for a moment or any span of time grant me that my argument has been convincing, and just hypothetically say, what if for the next 30 minutes I consider that the spiritual transactional system is real, then, the people saying let's just get rid of money, they're not really looking too deep into things, and they don't realize that if you do get rid of the barter system or cash, that there's only one thing left. There's the spiritual financial system. And it's the same. It's the same. It's the same sort of system, and it has all the attributes, benefits, and advantages of any other system. So, except that it has major disadvantages that, the barter system, and then anything that's evolved over time. Any of the systems that have evolved over time to address the disadvantages of the spiritual transaction system. But that's the point, is that those systems have evolved to address the disadvantages of, let's quote unquote this, the one true system, right? Wow, you really accidentally hit the space bar and it just stops recording. Wow, this is going to be a finicky sort of. I think this might be like annoying. Well, there's going to be more difficulties than I foresee, for sure. Anyways, right, quote unquote, the one true system. And I say it like that, because doing so kind of speaks to that primitive, sort of more spiritual inner self than just speaking conversationally like I am now. If I say the one true system, this speaks more to that passion within us than I'm trying to do right now. But that is the kind of importance that I would like to have. That's the point of that's the point of this recording. I do want the spiritual transaction system, the spiritual financial system, quote unquote, to have that level of importance to us. And I just want, like, people who don't think that money is a good thing, I want them to realize that money is the barter system, the gold standard, and then the credit standard, and probably sometime into the future here, we're going to be doing the crypto thing. Probably that's going to happen. So these financial systems keep evolving, to have greater advantages and address the disadvantages of the previous system. But they've evolved. They've all evolved from, and, if you could, please hypothetically grant me this point for at least a temporary amount of time so that you understand my whole argument before you start shooting holes in it. But, yeah, so they all evolved from this one source, and that source hopefully is a real thing, and that was part of the thing that I've hopefully been convincing about, that it is a real thing, and that's supposed to be one of the things that when you're trying to understand my point, you're supposed to be also including that into the hypothetical granting of my establishments that the spiritual system is a reality and that these other systems evolved from it. So that the person who's saying, let's get rid of money, they can only mean let's go back to the spiritual financial system, because what they can't mean is let's get rid of every financial system, and I think this is really important. I mean, maybe I should just go ahead and say it like the way I want to say it first, because I tend to, the way it comes up in the mind, it's coming from within me, right? It's coming from within the mind. So, of course, when it first comes out, it's going to have that, ooh, this is important stuff sort of like emphasis. And it's going to be like, and like when it comes out, it's either going to be like, oh, this is a message from God, or, it's going to come out like, like my fist is already raised and it's clenched tight and it's like, this comes from ironclad certainty, stuff like that. And then, of course, it goes through the filter of consciousness and, comes out nice and reasonable sounding like this. And I don't sound like a lunatic. But yeah, the person saying, let's get rid of money, the only thing they can be saying is let's go back to the spiritual financial system, because what they cannot be saying is let's get rid of every financial system, because if they're saying that, then they're saying let's get rid of the spirit. And, to me, if I heard somebody say that, I would think that I'm listening to somebody talk about suicide. I would think that I'm hearing somebody who sounds very sad when I hear that. It could be different. There's always counter arguments, but when it first comes out of me, that's what I hear. Like, if you want to get rid of the spirit, okay, but like I said, those arguments are not usually made with that much integration in mind. They're usually just off the cuff, sort of, blah 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 blah. So, but it would be great. Okay, so now we're gonna get into the conclusions. Is it the conclusions or the ramifications? The consequences. Aha. So the consequences of this, if I had made an attempt or if I had proved anything, I would say the consequences of this proof are this, quote unquote. But since I didn't do any of that, it's all just, think about it this way, quote unquote. It's all just, hear me out, it's all that. But to myself, it's not just that. To myself, I find all of this extremely convincing, and I find it all to be, just as rigorous as the most, anal retentive academic could ever possibly wish for. I find it all, I'm trying to deliver it in a way that's easily digestible for anyone, but the reason that I don't feel as much the need to present a proof for for any of it, really, the reason I don't feel the need to present a proof for that is because I assume that is possible, right? Like, I could make any arbitrary argument whatsoever, and I'm saying that I can make that argument in the common language context, like just sitting in your living room talking to someone who's close to you, or just at work talking to your buddies. I can make any argument in those situations, and the formal, logical, academic rigorists out there could take that argument and turn it into something that appeases their desire for whatever level of rigor they desire. I'm assuming that that's possible. And I'm not just assuming that it's possible for my arguments. I'm assuming that it's possible for any argument. So that's why, if you want more rigor, you go ahead and you get it. But I'm moving on. And I've already found all of this to be very convincing. So the consequences. And why I think that this is an important insight to have made. Number one, it explains money. It explains why money should be a thing, and it should be a real thing. But, if there's nothing to disagree with in the argument, and everybody in the whole world agreed to the points, which, is silly. It's impossible, probably. But maybe not, time will tell. But anyways, if everybody in the whole world agreed that the points were, convincing and everything, then we would stop. We would stop hating on money. We would stop saying, let's get rid of it. We would stop saying that money is the root of all evil, just sort of a whole sector or, segment of the argument population that's out there will just vanish. And in its place will be agreement, and we'll be right. The whole human race will be in agreement, and we will be right. And we'll stop something that's really held us back, because yeah, sure, I'll say, like, we hate rich people. We hate on rich people, right? And when you talk generally like that, the group, you're not talking about individuals of the rich. You're not talking about rich individuals. When you say rich people, the class, when you say that, then you can say things like, well, they haven't done themselves anything. I'm not going to go into, like, statistics and say, like, this percentage of rich people is good and this percentage of rich people is bad. I'm not gonna go into any arguments. I'm just gonna say, like, we hate on rich people, and that's probably just as unjustified as any other sort of class, prejudicial judgment. That's probably, I would say, in my mind, the turnaround from thinking that money is sort of like dirty, and even, like in the least consequential, in the least threatening, in the least dangerous sort of sense, there's a large amount of thinking out there that says, again, in the least dangerous sort of sense, there's a large amount of thinking out there that says that money is, at the very least, dirty. It's kind of icky to think about and talk about money. Okay. And then, of course, you all know, everybody who is listening to this, you all know that it goes much farther than that, and that we hate money. We hate that we need money in order to live, which is okay. We hate on rich people, and but so that is why I decided to actually kind of commit this to a recording, because I am coming from the objectivist school of thought, and so justifying the use of money is something that is on the back burner. Most times when you're coming from that school of thought. Do I go any deeper into why that might be, or do I just leave it at that? I'll just leave it at that for now. That when you are coming from the objectivist school of thought, that justifying the use of money, and that money is a good thing, is something that you always sort of work on and, hone your own thinking, my own thinking. I never would have gotten this far if I was just trying to counter-argue arguments that say that money is bad. I never would have gotten this far if I was just trying to win that argument. If I was just trying to win that argument, I never would have gotten this far. How I got this far to realize that it's all based on the spiritual transactional system. And of course I say spiritual financial system because of how I realized, because I of course I want, it's not typical, it's not normal to call the spirit or the mind or feelings, or that I didn't even get into. I realize now that I didn't even really try to define what the spirit is. I was thinking the other day about whether or not I could actually tell the difference between the spirit and feelings. I probably gave that about 20-30 minutes worth of thought, at the end of which, and a little bit of internet research, at the end of which, no, I'll be honest with you, I cannot tell the difference between the spirit and feelings. What I read from other people didn't sound convincing, and I'm not sure how important it is to actually define the spirit. anyways, because again, like, it might be something that's just experiential. It might be something that's just definable ostensibly only. If the only means of defining the thing is ostensible means, then I can only point to it and say, look, that's what it is. So probably the only way to define it is through your own experience, anyways. And that sort of also, in my mind, legitimizes it as, that proves that it's real. But I'm not officially using the word proof. I'm just saying that, what I've already said. I find my own arguments convincing. Which sounds odd to say, but it's not. It should be the case. Okay. Where was I? Consequences. Hopefully we can all agree that money is a good thing. I know that there's problems with making that statement without any qualifications, but I'll just kind of pin on the end there, the asterisk, and the footnote says all qualifications that need to be made in order to make this statement true have been made and are understood by all parties involved, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that in the end, we can say, hey, money is a good thing. Is that the end of the recording? Do I need to go any farther? I've said the argument. I've said what it's based on. I've said what my hopes are, what I consider the consequences of the realization. Okay, now I don't want to call it an argument anymore. Now I want to call it a realization, because at this point in the recording, we're not talking about me trying to convince you anymore. Now, at this point in the recording, we're talking about the way I view the things that have been said. And as I was saying, okay. You come out of the objectivist school, and sort of like the justification for using money is always something that's on the back burner. And I would have never gone so deep with my points if I was just trying to defeat the other side's arguments. I could only get this deep by trying to convince myself that this must be the basis for money. This must be the reason. This must be the thing that legitimizes money. And I'm not trying to convince you right now. I'm recounting this moment that was convincing to me. I'm saying, this must be it. This must be the thing that legitimizes money, because I can't see anything else that would. And it makes so much sense. Like, it just fits. Like the spiritual debt that I talked about, like when somebody compliments you and you feel like complimenting them back, like that's convincing. Like, that convinces me. And you can put that into terms that is like money. Like they sort of paid you a compliment, right? You can put it that way. And I'm not even twisting words. I am twisting words, but but I'm using a twisting of words or a way of speaking that has already been in existence, in my favor. That is a saying. People do say that, and like, I pay you a compliment. You paid me a compliment. That word paid, spiritual transactional system. It's a real thing. And if it is a real thing, that's to do with the life. That's to do with reality and the existence of reality and the existence of a living thing within that reality that is distinct enough from the other things in that reality to actually be called something different than just being grouped in with the rest of reality. So we come up with the other word, living, So we have this living thing within reality. And that living thing has emotions. And like I already said, I tried, but I couldn't really tell you the difference between. I saw some stuff. I gave you the end of the effort, which was no. I can't really say that anything was convincing. Like I never convinced myself, and I never found anybody else's writings convincing as to a distinct difference between. But I saw some stuff that maybe there's something there. So, there might be a difference between the spirit and reality. There's always the chance, like epistemologically speaking, that the distinction will become useful later on. Anyways, the separate words exist, which is not evidence in itself, but it is there in case we need to use the words distinctly in a rigorous sense later on. Am I just repeating myself at this point? Let me check my notes. We can think of the spiritual payment system as even predating the barter system. And consequences in terms of social coming together, the above is one of the most crucial discoveries. Yeah, it's one of the most crucial discoveries. I don't hold out much hope for me ever realizing any, ramifications in the real world from me making this argument. I'll probably never see any of it happen in my lifetime. That's fine or whatever, as long as I get it out there, and maybe it'll have some effect. I'm sure somebody out there has probably already made this point even, and it's probably being made by multiple people. I don't know. But I'm one of the ones making it, and so if it ever becomes a reality, then I helped bring that reality about a little quicker than it would have been without the extra voice in there doing it. So I find it all convincing. I think that you don't have to look at the spirit in terms of it being a transactional system. You can think of the spirit normally as you normally would, just it's, how you feel about life, or maybe it's how you're feeling right now, or, you can go back to thinking. You don't always have to think about it. I was just pointing out that perhaps if there is this attribute of it, if there is this one aspect of it, then that would be what eventually would evolve into the thing that we don't like, and we should stop not liking it because if you say you don't like it, you say you don't like yourself, and you shouldn't say that. You should like yourself. And I know that that's not very rigorous to say. That's not very academic. I don't exist in the academic world. I exist in this pseudo in between world. That's what I want. Anyways, I want to exist in this pseudo in between the guy on the street and the academic world. That's where I want to exist. I want to communicate and translate between the two. That's what I hope to do. Oh, wow. It's kind of hard to believe that I might even be at the end of this point, because I didn't think it was going to be like this. I thought it was going to go on and on and on and on and on forever. I thought it would be much more difficult to come to an end. I thought I would just ramble and ramble. I am rambling, but I thought I would ramble about the consequences. And I mean, I guess I didn't talk about anything else that ties in. I talked about my hopes for the argument, which is the main point. The main point is eventually, hopefully, the whole world can agree that money is a good thing, and we can just, stop talking about money like it's a bad thing. Obviously greed and but I'm not going to get into that. in the sense that I'm using it. Money is just, a tool like anything else. It's, we don't use the butter churn anymore. Well, somebody does. The factory does. But we use a machine to do it now because the machine is a better way of producing butter than the butter churn. Whatever, whatever example you have on your head. Like, this is an improvement over the old, and cash money is an improvement over the gold standard. And it certainly looks like this cryptocurrency stuff with its emphasis on, heightened security and cutting out the middleman and, just its similarity in every respect to the credit card that we already use, except that it's more safe. That seems to be, the next evolutionary step in this whole thing that begins with the spiritual, this one. If you like it better, I don't have to use the spirit like the whole spirit is consumed with, the whole spirit is defined by this transactional nature. We don't have to do that. I'm not saying that. We don't have to define the whole spirit by this transactional nature. Physically speaking, oh man, don't even hold on a second. That might be where I start to get out of hand, and I don't have time for that. But how to keep that short. If you're speaking about physics and tie-ins to physics and, electrons going back and forth and electrons are energy and, you can go that way. I can spend some time, light, whatever. I could spend some time there. I'm not going to. I'm going to hold myself to here and just saying the transactional aspect of the spirit and the way the spirit functions is not the whole. I'm not going to say that when I'm coming up with a definition for the spirit, I'm not going to say, the definition of the spirit is that it is a transactional system similar to money. I'm not going to say that. I'm saying that within the whole that is the whole entire description of the spirit and, the way it behaves, what it is and what it does, and what the spirit might be when you want to describe it in a physical sense, some sort of energy within us, consciousness, blah, 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 blah. We're not going to go down that road right now yet. We're not going to go down that road yet. But I'm not saying that this transactional stuff is everything. I'm not saying that that's what it all is. That's the end of the spirit. It's just a transactional system. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that transactions are within that scope. Transactions are whatever order, words in order I could say that did fully define the spirit and everything that it does. Within those words would be something to address this transactional nature, the back and forth sort of thing that we're talking about. So, like if you're poetic or artistic, these words can all be taken both ways, either complimentary or offensively, and but if you are thinking that I'm sort of making the spirit dirty because I'm comparing it to money, I'm not saying that the spirit is fully defined by a metaphor to money. I'm simply saying that it's part of it. Part of the behavior of the thing is similar to money, and that probably the barter system and the cash money, or the gold standard, and then cash, and any other money system that we use in the future, they're probably all evolved from and motivated by a need to address the reality of this transactional, natural aspect of this thing that really exists, the spirit, and created to address some of the disadvantages of working with that thing, like the magnitudes of debt not being very definitive, very concrete, very absolute, right? I helped you move 10 years ago. Well, how many compliments do you have to give me in order to pay for that, service? I think you get what I mean. And I already said that I'm not going to jump into physics. I'm not going to go crazy. No, I don't mean crazy. I mean, I'm not going to widen my scope that much right now because, yeah, okay. So that's it. This is the end. If I think of anything shortly in the next few minutes that needs to be added on, I will do that. But otherwise, this is going to be recording number 1. And if I don't come back and add on to the end of this, then the only other thing that'll happen later on is I'll probably make separate recordings that make the argument more effective and more efficient and more eloquent. And I'll probably at some point jump into those tie-ins about, like I mentioned very briefly, for physics. I'll probably jump into that at some other later time. Okay, yes, I will end this recording now. Is this thing on? Okay, I did think of something I forgot to mention on yesterday's recording. For those people who want to do away with money, typical arguments might sound like, let's just do things out of the kindness of our heart, and they might be associated with communism or socialism, etc. Let's do things that, quote unquote, let's do things out of the kindness of our heart. What I mean to point out by bringing up that example is, doesn't that depend on, if you accept that argument, doesn't that prove the existence of a spiritual transactional system? 1 second. Okay. Yeah. And if you were more sort of rigorously academic minded, you would seek to set up a contradiction here by saying, you want to do away with money, but you're relying on a system, but your argument relies on a system of transaction that would evolve eventually into money, the use of money. So, and then you would attempt to say your argument contradicts itself. Yeah. Also, and likewise, typical arguments for communism are involving the poor, and I always have to paraphrase, so they might not come out the most sensitive way, but basically, quote unquote, you should care about the poor. If you don't, you're a bad person. And, if somebody out there is not as well off as you, then you should give, at least some of your stuff to them. Basic, communism, socialism type of argument. And then again, if you're rigorously academically minded, and you were counter arguing against that, you would again seek to make a contradiction out of that by saying, the moment that you say that less fortunate people should make you feel bad, that's the moment where you actually make use of the spiritual transactional system. And again, that if you establish that system in your argument, if you make use of that system in your argument, and you allow that system will eventually become money, then your opponents will accuse you of self-contradiction. So those were two things that I forgot to mention yesterday. They're not really that separate. They're kind of the same thing. And that's it, I believe.